questions, or you had something else you wanted to add before we start?
No, yeah.
Nice.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here too.
Mhm.
Yeah, so throughout this show, and throughout my time, like, oh, is that the ice shift?
It's the ice.
I've been wondering, like, what specific environments are, whether they be, mental environments, physical environments, like, what is integral to your process and your work?
Oh, it's, well, lighting is probably one of the most important things, and it's taken a long time to figure out, like, how to get it set right. Obviously, when I first moved into a studio, that was the first time I had, like, the space to specifically work. Before then, it was just in my room in an apartment with a drafting table. So it was just a matter of finding where I could get the drafting table in the room for the best light. And so when I moved into a studio, to have there was skylight. So that just was a game changer, especially when, working with oil paint. Oil comes alive under all sorts of type of different light, but sunlight is like the best thing. So yeah, just making sure that the light is good is really important, and then just doing it, getting disciplined in a way that you are working consistently, even when you're not really in the headspace. Like, because when I'm working, this is, as I'm self-taught, I've done all of this in my downtime outside of work. So sometimes you're working a crappy job and you come home and you need to kind of like level before you get started. Obviously, you can't just go right in. And after working, you're like, you just worked. You don't want to necessarily do more work, but it ultimately is work. So it's almost like, I definitely consider it like another job. So getting in the headspace of another job can be kind of hard to like want to do that, but also not doing that is much worse, I think, in terms of like where my headspace then goes. I get really antsy, and it's like reading. You got to read to stay kind of like thinking about things, and so yeah, I wouldn't say there's a specific mode, but music is also really important. There's a lot of really beautiful, crazy, weird music in the world, and without music, being in the studio on the second job or third job, wherever, can be really hard. And yeah, there's a lot of really, like, I feel like I owe so much to musicians. Like, I barely ever have enough money to get the things I need to work, in addition to like supporting other artists. But you kind of have to do that and engage with other artists. And when you're doing something solitary, by yourself in a room, like, having that other kind of creative presence is key. When I first started visual art, I was in New York City, and I was sharing my apartment, and I was actually surrounded by a lot of people at that time. I was younger, and my social circle was kind of always coming and going. And I loved that when I first got started. It was kind of weird because, like, when I started doing visual art in my early 20s, after a while of, like, when I was a kid, I did it, and then I got back into it. It was weird because, like, I was surrounded by so many people, and now while I'm doing it, I'm not really. It's pretty solitary, which is hard. And I think if I had it my way, like, I'd have more people around, while I'm working. But also at the same time, you kind of have to seclude yourself a bit and get into it, like, because you're not in a space of rational thinking. Kind of like, if you think about the world around you, you're like, you have to do all of these kind of weird things to engage the world. And when you're painting, at least the way that I'm working, is it just, color is king, and you just kind of like, and materials, and you just kind of like, so you have to train yourself to kind of like be in that playful headspace that you just don't think about, you know.
Yeah, you kind of have to craft your own environment.
Yeah, totally. And you have to make sure you stay on top of things. It's easy for the studio to get messy. You kind of need it to get messy, especially when you're working in the moment. And certain paintings, individual or groups of paintings, require letting things kind of go for a bit. You know, sometimes you leave your brushes in the mineral oil or spirit for a couple days if you're working on something, and you know you're just going to go right back in. But it's also good to get in the habit of cleaning them as often as you can. And yeah, so there's a balance, you know, obviously. You know, too much of anything can not be good. So you got to balance the madness a little bit, you know.
In terms of like musical environments, like what you mentioned when you kind of are coming home from work and you're kind of like entering a new phase of like being by like opening yourself up to like other artists and like musicians. The playlist you curated for us, like I feel like says a lot about that. Would you say that playlist is specific to just this body of work, or kind of has your music taste progressed over time?
Yeah, it's definitely progressed. It's like, I would say it's always kind of moving and changing. And the music that I picked specifically for this opening, I went back to kind of like, I think over time I've gone further and further into experimental noise, house, and other types of music. And the musicians, the artists, I consider them more like composers, because they're kind of arranging a multitude of sounds and things, and it's like a collage in a lot of ways too. So those artists were just, I played them a lot, and the earlier pieces, like, you know, it's hard to show or to say what pieces they are, but there are some pieces in here that are earlier than others, and those would be more associated with that music. But I would say, because my work in oil kind of coincided with COVID, yeah, I forget where I was going to go with that, but yeah, there was just, I don't know, there's just a lot of music during that period of time, and yeah, I forget where I was going to go with that, but so I would say like that chunk of music probably represents like a good, like, I would go back to those albums and those musicians a lot, but that playlist is kind of like, I guess, more like homage to that early period when I was working, where, yeah, I was playing a lot of those albums, and they were like really moving albums. Because like when you're working and painting, you kind of like go and you go into another like headspace, and then if you also have some of these the audio stimuli that's like unbelievable masterpieces also working at the same time, it's just like crazy, and it's really moving, and it can make you cry or dance and all that, and you're only by yourself, so it's all kind of like weird, but those were really important albums, and specifically songs that were like just massive during that period of time. So yeah, since then I've gone further into weirder music, like there's more, you know, music concrete, and then it's just a lot of noise music that I like. There's a certain labels that release very kind of particular genre, or I don't know if it's a genre, but types of noise music and experimental and house music. So now there's a label, No Rent Records, based in Philadelphia. This guy Jason Krumer, who I think is really, you know, is probably the next, like, I would consider like a composer type, or just like all around musician, creator. who I would probably put into that realm of those early artists like Terry Thamelitz and Craig Klaus and the Alessandro Cortini from that early period. So yeah, and some of those albums are just like somebody in a room and there's a mic somewhere in the room and he's dragging something across the floor and it sounds like Animal or something like that, but it's like there's actual things happening, and there's something about those kind of very specific recordings of like I guess it would be avant-garde or just in the moment that are like it's that yearning for like company, but like very present, so but at the same time, like all the basic, pop music's great too, like whatever. But but it's fun to get, because when a lot of times when I'm starting a painting, I'm like, I don't know exactly what I want. I just have an idea. Like maybe I want something figurative, maybe I want a landscape, or maybe I want to go fully abstract or something. But so yeah, sometimes the more experimental can help me kind of like loosen up, and other times I'm like throw on the, who is it? I don't know, some pop musician. So, so.
I just wanted to iterate quickly since we had someone else join. Anyone is free to chime in with questions, like, kind of a free-for-all, free-form Q&A. So if anything comes up that you're curious about, feel free to throw it out there. Yes, please.
One of the main things that struck out to me when I was like looking at it is like the use of green. And I feel like green can be like a scary color if it's not used in like landscape or like for clothing. And I see you have green socks. So I'm wondering if that's like a conscious decision, and if it is, like, what is maybe your particular relationship with green? Because I mean I really enjoy seeing like the different tones and like textures, and it's I come from like theater lighting where like green is a lot more like it can be scary, especially when it comes to like lighting actors, and it's like, oh, do you want to make
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm still kind of figuring out my use of green. I don't know if the mic picks up the questions, but I'll try my best to respond in a way that it makes sense. I just saw a painting online recently. I think it was like Edvard Munch, or I think that's how you say his name. And it's called The Murderer, and it's like a normal setting, normal colors, and the face of the person is green, and it's like, it's pretty freaky. It's like, whoa. I think I want green to be my favorite color. I also heard that like green, there's more different types of green than any other color. I don't know if that's true or not.
The human eye can see more shades of green than any other color.
Right. The human eye can see more shades of green. Yeah. I guess the first thing that I would say is that I want green to be my favorite color, but it's probably not. It's probably blue. I've always been blue, but blue is kind of boring, but I love it. So green is just, I don't know, it's weird, it's funky, and in painting skin tones, green is a really great color, I think, to throw in there, whether you're underpainting with green or, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's typically like underpainting. And so part of me wants to put something on top of the green. Like green looks almost unfinished to me. Like there's one painting in the back there, and it's kind of like a figurative abstract. And it to me, it's like it doesn't look finished, but I also really love how it looks, and I can't help but like, I don't want to take that away. So, but I know that in the past I was working on it was a figurative painting, and it was green for the longest time, and I eventually did paint add skin color tones to it, and it looks, I think it makes it's just easier to work with. Like when you're using green and red or orange, they have a relationship that I think works really well. But yeah, and I mean, this particular one, the room with furniture, again, like there's a lot of green in it. It's not all like, it's weird. I don't know. I like it. I don't want to do too much of it. I know I've done a lot of it though, and it's a good observation because I kind of want to not put so much green on things, but I do like it. So I hope that answers your question. I can go further, but it's probably majority of what.
That works.
I have a question real quick. You mentioned a little bit like how when you lived in New York or
Mhm.
during COVID, your style and your mediums changed a little bit. Like how else has your style evolved through your practice over the years?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So when I first, when I knew that, so I took time when I lived in New York. So I got out of college. I went to school for finance. While I was in school, and I went to school. I went to Merrill Lynch in 2007. Did an internship while I was in school as part of the curriculum. I went to school in Boston, and at that point, soon after I got back, I realized I was maybe not wanting to get into finance. And then the financial recession hit and the housing market crashed. And I had happened to be working in the sector of swap options where, derivatives and all this stuff was happening. I was on that floor getting signatures and stuff. And that's was kind of ground zero for where things were like really ridiculous. That being said, that's like the beginning of that change. And I took a creative writing course. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I love this. I got a really good response from my peers from a story that I wrote. And this was just like an elective. It was like the one class was like A+. It was like, okay, great. Maybe that's what I should be doing. At least I was more interested in that. And I had been, my dad gave me a lot of books growing up, and that's where my literary tastes and stuff begins. I think with my dad handing me books. He was a journalist, and so that path started with writing, and then I had the opportunity to spend some time working on stories, writing stories, and I ended up collaging and drawing, which is something I used to do when I was younger. And suddenly it was like, okay, maybe it's not the writing. I had a friend tell me that when you do the thing that you do to procrastinate from the thing you're supposed to do is maybe the thing you should be doing. And the visual artwork was like a revelation. It was like when I was procrastinating and drawing and making these collages, it was like I'd opened another door, and I was like, this is exactly where I feel the most like alive and like in control of my faculties in terms of like how I can communicate, and this was also around the time of Instagram. So it was like all sorts of like visual stimuli happening that were kind of coming together. But in terms of oil painting, it was Neo Rock. There was an exhibit in New York City, and I think it was 2011 or 2012, somewhere around there. It might have been 2013 at the latest. Big gallery, David Zwerner, and he works in oil paints on like really large scale. I went to that show, and I was like really blown away by what I saw in there. It was like you have to look at the work, but it's figurative. There's a lot of landscape. It's beautiful, and if you get really close to the painting, it's kind of a mess. But when you get to a certain distance, it's like amazing, and it's like another world. So it was that point I was like, I want to try to do that. Like I wanted to do exactly what he was doing. So when I started, that's what I was trying to do. It was like I didn't have access to large scale like canvas, and I didn't have the money for that. So I got small canvas at the store and got the primaries, and I worked on, smaller 16 by 20 or 11 by 14. So it was kind of like, and when I was using those, I was just kind of like experimenting with oil and seeing how I could make it look like something was actually there, with light and all of that. But the desire was to paint like Neo Rock, to get like that kind of, to draw people in a space with buildings and nature and stuff like that. It's not, I wouldn't say that's where I am now, but that's where I started. And if you can kind of see with some of the other pieces, some of which aren't here, some, they hearken to kind of his style. And there's one in particular over here that the homage to Jack Gilbert. It's not quite a neo rock, but it is. There's trees in it, and there's a little bit more perspective, and it's a little bit more like kind of like there was a lot of restraint putting those paintings together, because it doesn't take a lot to. I don't want to overwork something, and that's what I liked about neo rock, is that I could see that he wasn't overworking things, but he was getting exactly what I think I would want to see in a painting. I didn't want to get meticulous with it. I didn't want to get a neck, I didn't want to crane my neck to be able to see something that I wanted to see. So I wanted it to be physical, and that's still the case. But the style, in terms of what just comes most naturally, has definitely changed. And I think it's always should be changing in ways that you just challenged, I guess, to kind of, and now I'm like, some of my favorite, painters are completely the opposite of neo rock in terms of like how they're working and what they finish with. So I would say I've gone more abstract, but I do love those traditional looking paintings, and I do want to go back to them. There's always this urge to do that, because you can get, it's like tripping. It's like very psychic. It can be very like a wild experience. It's just, you need a lot of space to do that stuff, because it doesn't take that long to get, if you know what you want, like it shouldn't take that long to get there. And I like not knowing what I want until I see it. So I'll have the painting like tell me what's going on. That's what I like about oil, is that like it sits there and there's just a lot for it to give back to me. So it's kind of a circuitous answer, but yeah. And like, for example, the one painting that I'm referring to in the corner there, I remember when I put the one tree that's in there, I was like, oh, that's like some weird kind of cartoon looking tree that probably doesn't exist. I wonder what I thought about to get there. And I thought, maybe is it stupid? Maybe I don't want it there. And then I've seen so many trees in Portland that look like that. It's crazy. So, yeah, I'm always trying to I don't want to know exactly where I'm going. And yeah, I think I have to have a lot of pieces going for that to feel like fresh and new. So yeah, I'd say I'm bringing more color in over time, but I also, in the beginning also, I would restrict myself to certain colors, and I think that can make a really beautiful painting. But I also like the idea of not being restricted by anything, and having, sometimes you have all the colors and then you meld them so close together that you no longer, it dials in. So, hello. Yeah, that's me.
I can't stay. I just want to say congratulations. You have a great work.
Oh, thank you.
And don't stop, because you know about something there. And keep doing it, right?
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Okay.
I appreciate it.
I got a question. So, when I look at your paintings, to me, it feels like each one is very intentional, right?
Yeah.
The furniture in this room, this painting, it's like each quadrant of it is like I can't help but try to look for the explanation or meaning behind it. What is that reflection? I mean, it almost looks like a reflection, and there's a character holding other characters. guess what I'm wondering is, when you're painting these, like, how do you hope that your audience, how do you hope that they're interpreting, or how do you hope that they're understanding your paintings? Or is that even something you're after?
Well, what I like about painting, as opposed to, you know, writing, for example, is that it is not literal at all, and there is, you know, even just like titling a painting, it's like an afterthought. I feel like it should maybe be an after. It doesn't have to be. It's not a rule, but you know, Naomi and I were talking about this, and I'll be working sometimes, and I'll be like, I know exactly what this painting is. It'll be a title, you know, in my mind. And as I'm working, I'm like, this is exactly what this painting is. And I'm like 100% convinced. And then either later that day or the next day, I'm like, nope, not at all. It's completely something else. And by the time a painting, I feel like it's done and it's finished, it's its own thing. It's just like, it's there and I know that it's done. And I love that feeling of being like, it's over, we did it, we got to the other side. And the way to know, there's no answer. It's just there. And that's what I love about the painting, is that you can just look at it and feel like whatever it is that. And it's kind of like there's no desire to portray anything with a particular painting, but there are desires that I have before certain paintings, like whether it's landscape or it's, you know, starting painting and wanting to resemble Neil Rock or something like that. There are desires that I have but the further back that they can be, the better by the time you finish, because it's just going to be whatever it is. That painting, the one that that actually became something somewhat of a autobiographical reference. And when I saw it, I just saw like a mother and a father and children, and you know, just how freaky shit can get, you know, as like in a kind of a scary world, you know, just a single family. There's a quote by Kurt Vonnegut where he says something about like how vulnerable like a single family unit can be, you know, and how and I just when it started coming together in that way, I saw that, and then that's where the title kind of like comes in, but yeah, it went through a lot of different phases before it got to this point, and it's kind of crazy just how different the whole process, like the beginning to end, can be. Sometimes it's just like a little segment, like the ear and the face with the X in the top right corner of that. It's probably like there was a room, and yeah, it's hard to say, but it's amazing what parts will just not change. Like there's where the orange meets the yellow on the face, that's kind of looking at the X. It's like it had to stay. It was not going to change. So there's certain visual elements that just have to be there. And I don't know. I kind of lost that answer, but and then with the room with furniture, even like. That was it was a figurative painting at first, and then as soon as I knew what, you know, as soon as it becomes a room, for example, then it just the strokes become more sure, and then it just comes together. I don't know. Yeah.
I really liked how you were talking about kind of like noise music in the beginning, and then collaging, because that's kind of like the same feeling that I get from these. It's very like dreamlike, and even like you describing your process of like finding yourself in the journey or finding the painting in the journey. I feel like that, to me, it just like clicks so well with like what you're mentioning, like I said, about the noise music and the collage. Do you feel like it's dreamlike? Because to me, it feels very dreamlike.
Yeah. So the paintings that I have right now that I'm working on, that's when I like to have paintings together in working in that like kind of are having a conversation with each other in a way. I want there to be like a visual language happening where it's like kind of like a dream almost. And when I that was one of the other desires that I had when I first started, because I loved collaging. When I was a kid, I had like an X-Acto knife, and I would collage some stuff. There's some weird collages I did when I was like 10 or something like that. I would love to see them because I know they're totally out there. But then I started collage, and I collaged again in New York when I started drawing again, and I love that process. But I hated the thought of having to collect all this magazines and all this stuff. Although it is really fun, like going to secondhand stores and finding weird books from all across time, and then taking them home and cutting them out, and that is a lot of fun. But it's kind of like there's a lot of paper to manage, and I just got it's like I don't want to necessarily do that. And that was like the whole idea about writing. I wanted to be able to travel, and I thought, well, if I'm going to be a creative person, writing would be excellent. Because then I just need a pen and a paper, and that's it. It's about as cheap as you can go. No overhead, really. But when it was clear that like visual art is just what comes more naturally, then I decided that, oil paint is the nice, like, it's just oil paintings I think are the best looking paintings, and that's what I want to be able to do. I had that thought that I want to be able to collage in, like I want to be able to collage, but with my paintbrush in a way, and you can kind of do that. Like I don't think that I necessarily do that with these paintings, but there are some examples of paintings that I have that I feel like I did do that, where because I rarely like have a thought about a thing that I'm going to put into a painting. It's just like it's more the context, the color, and all that, and then it kind of dreamlike happens in there. But I think more in the vein of neo-rock, he's actually going to put like something in there, and then it distorts or whatever. But you can actually like get in like pretty accurate representations of things and make it into kind of a collage. And there are plenty of artists, I think, that do that. But yeah, it's funny that you say that, because that was definitely like a thought of mine. Like, I'm always trying to find ways to kind of like maybe streamline things as well as I can, but also be as creative as possible. And that was one of the thoughts that I had, was like, I want to be able to collage, but with the paintbrush, or
Did you go through a process of kind of like trial and error before you landed on oil paint, or did you kind of just know from the beginning that you wanted it to be oil paint?
I knew that oil was the medium that I had to try. Like, it was like, living in New York, I did not think in my wildest dreams I'd have a space to be able to deal with all the fumes and everything. And so when I knew that it was oil painting that I was going to do, that was kind of like the beginning of me moving from New York and into some place that I could afford, that I could, have space to work in, especially going larger. But up at, even to the point of being in the studio, I still, I think it was about maybe 3 or 4 months before I started using oil. And by that point, I was, I had done the zines. I had done, DOF 1, DOF 2, and all that. And I was working with, just drawing and then inking, which I didn't like at all. I liked that some of the things I could do with it, but it wasn't enough. And it was, the next step for me was then gouache, because gouache looks really nice on paper, and it almost looks like oil, honestly. And like some very nice gouache out there. And with gouache, you're like, it's kind of like it's like oil, but you don't need mineral spirits. You just need water. So it's a great thing to start with before oil painting. So I was actually doing gouache drawing / paintings. What happened was with the books, I would either make like a panel out of an ink drawing straight without doing anything beforehand, which is what I like the most, which I think is what I wanted. But as I started to get towards painting, I love drawing with pencil. So what I would do is I would draw with the pencil, and then I try to draw as little as I could with the pencil, and then I would paint. But that's not what I wanted to do, because that's not the approach that I wanted to go with. But before I started oil painting, I did a little bit of that, and then I started just painting gouache directly on. But you can't really paint like a painter in the way that I wanted to paint, messy and work like on paper, because it will start to tear, it will start to get wet, it'll rip, it'll warp. So at that point, it was like, okay, I need a canvas, and I got to get the oil paint. So at that point, it was time to just get the oil paint and start getting it on there. And immediately, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is the one this is the material that I need. I felt no need to draw anything beforehand, because oil paint, you can wipe it if you need to and keep going or whatever. And it's resilient. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you said about how music plays a part in your creative process, and how you think of it as another artist's creative presence in the room. I was just curious if there are any other things that influence your practice and what they might be.
Definitely other paintings. I have to be careful about Instagram and stuff like that, because there's so many crazy talented people out there posting stuff, and it's intimidating, and it's like, oh, I love to see these things, and then I kind of want to do them, and then I'm partially like kind of bummed because maybe that's not how I do it. And I got to be careful with all that. It's always something that I have to check myself on, and I try to limit my time of like scrolling through, because when I get into that headspace of like, I really like something, then I kind of want to do it too. But ultimately, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. That's what I like the most anyway, really, when it comes down to it. So it's like, in terms of influence, I would say it's great. Those are very strong influences as well. But they're also, I think, they can be too much of a good thing is not good, And I think that's what I like about painting and art in general, is that you kind of have to remove yourself a little bit. I don't like to have to see everything on the phone. It's so easy. It's much. That's why I like working with painting, is that I'm engaging with something that's in the room. It's just us, and it's quiet. It's not saying anything, and it's. So the kind of like crazy world of the internet, and how important it is to share work through the internet and all of that, it can be good and kind of also bad. So I find that music is like the perfect combination for me. It doesn't seem to want to hurt me in any way.
What kind of music you enjoy?
I listen to a lot of different things, but I typically go towards like experimental house music, noise, electronic. I like piano music, pop music. But yeah, I typically go towards industrial music as well. I'm kind of like on an industrial thing these days, but it really does change. And I can listen to.
And you do it according to your mood?
It depends. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think yeah, it is a mood-based thing. I think like, as I was saying before, there's a certain album that I really love. That's just like somebody put a mic in a room and they started moving something across the floor. That's like a piece of metal or something like that, and it sounds like an animal or something. And depending on where I'm at, in life, whether it's between work or in the studio, like there's so many different variables that kind of factor in on what feels like the most like appropriate at any point. But usually something that's going to just remove me of like a train of thought, because I can obsess over things, and I find that like music that can kind of pull me out of like a obsessive line of thinking or whatever is always the best. And obviously like silence is great too sometimes. Sometimes you just don't need anything on. Sometimes a quiet thing, sometimes really loud. There's a couple. There was a period of time, like with the playlist that I made for the opening night. Like, there's a few albums that are really loud and very kind of like, metal, and I didn't put those on there because I was like, all right, getting pretty loud with this anyway. But there's some really loud stuff, and I just. Working a job you don't like, and then you get in the studio, you have to work your studio life, because it's all fun and games kind of, but it's not. It's work. Like, it's hard. You can't. You got to work hard to finish a painting. It's not gonna. You can't. If it's easy, or you have to put in a certain amount of blood and sweat and tears to get something done. Everybody's different in the way that they're going to get there, but you have to put in a lot to get what you want in return. So sometimes working these kind of shit jobs or whatever it might be, and dealing with whatever life out, I found that the noise music and something loud would really help me just kind of power through and keep working. But that's, it's a sliding scale of different stuff for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I will add that I didn't really get into like metal or anything until I started really getting into my artistic practice. Like, before that, I've listened to probably nicer things, like, a little bit quieter or whatever. And as I got more involved with my artwork, I got more drawn to like the kind of more crazy punk and whatever. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I think a lot of the pieces in this exhibit that speak the most to me have these kind of like almost like post-impressionistic Fauxist like strokes styles to them, but they also come off as like much less naturalist and much more industrial, like you were saying. And I was wondering, how do you like balance like these like very like organic and like energetic brush styles and strokes with like a style that is capturing like a contemporary take on like this industrial aspect that you're looking at?
So wait, say that again, because you're saying that the difference in brushstroke, like how do you get?
Yeah, like for example, like that one right behind you there.
The one right here?
With the art statement, like I think like the character forms on it, like they have like this like, especially like the head, that's have like this focused energy to it. That's like, it's energetic. It has like these like quick movements to it, and other parts of it are more careful and thought out. But it feels very like industrial to me.
Yeah, yeah.
It feels like less like beastly and more contemporary in its energy. And I was just wondering how like you get that feeling in your work.
That's a good question. I don't know exactly how I would respond to that. I think the fact that I don't know exactly how to respond to that, like about that particular piece, even is something that I probably go for. Even is that like I don't really know exactly. It's I don't know. Every piece has its own like kind of trajectory. Some are very different, and others are I don't know. I think there's a roundedness, a finished quality to a painting that I'm going for, and it sometimes requires all types of like focus or non-focus. I sometimes even just like blurring my eyes can help me like finish something, you know, because if I'm focused too much on one thing on a painting and I don't know exactly what comes next, like whatever I can do to distract myself, like even just leaving the studio and then getting a cup of water and coming back inside, I'm like, it looks so different suddenly. Like I just needed to walk away from it. So in that instance, like I think I just had to do that a number of times where I'd like look at it and walk away or something and then come, and then I'd be like, okay, that's where I got to go. Or, yeah, I mean, also I think a certain sense of humor. I think I like to do that. I know when I start to take myself too seriously, that's a bad road. And yeah, I mean, like the tragic life of certain artists, like Rothko, for example. You know, it's like, don't take yourself too seriously or it's going to end badly. So it's, I think, important to have a sense of humor about yourself, and if you can work it into the art, great. I don't necessarily think that makes it better or not, but if you can work it in nicely, that helps. Like that one over there, the two little guys' eyes, and I love doing that little part. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's a good one. No, I don't know exactly how I would respond to that.
It's such a cool, like, unique thing that I've never seen in anyone else's work.
Cool.
I just, like, love it about it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to add, I think one of the artists I really like, Josh Smith, he said something like, don't give people what they want necessarily, and in terms of like, you kind of always have to, like, I don't know exactly how to like follow up on what that statement is, because I think I'm still trying to understand what he's saying by it. But if there's one thing that I think is pretty consistent with me, is that there's not a lot of consistency that at least I can pick up on. There is, but it needs to remain elusive to me, I think.
Speaking about not taking things too seriously, do you know your main 3 astrological signs?
Oh no.
Okay, what about your son?
My son?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
When's your birthday?
Oh, October 20.
Scorpio?
Libra.
Oh, Libra.
Yeah. I'm a Libra. From what I know, it's the scale. So I'm like always like, making decisions can be very tough. That's why I'm like kind of always like my main issue is like, how do I limit the amount of time I'm racked by indecision? So.
Well, speaking of balance, I wanted to know more about like, the infamous work-life balance. Like, how do you approach that as an artist? And like, when you were first starting out, did that look different than what it does now?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the $1 million question. You don't want to, like, one of the things that in not going to school for art, I've had to put a lot of time in, obviously, to figure out, what's going on with my direction, my intellectual study. I didn't start really making artwork until, I didn't confidently start working and know that I was going to do oil paint until I had read a certain number of books. Like, and I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but like I needed to encounter a certain amount of contemporary nonfiction, like like David Graeber, for example, who's the late David Graeber. He encountering his first 5,000 years, like that was the beginning of my understanding, because things were so like this country is like a pretty violent, scary place to be, and to not even have like a firm like grasp on where you stand in the mess that is the broader politics and everything like that, it's like even scarier. Like it can be really depressing. So nailing down and connecting with literature that was, spoke to morals and ethics and just kind of like basic thinking and philosophy allowed me to go forward with confidence. But before then, I was like clueless, and I was like disappointed and kind of, like pissed off about things. And just the more that I read, the better I felt in connection with these kind of like harsh realities. So in terms of like the life and the work balance, I felt like it started to come together when I started encountering a certain amount of literature. And then as I read, the more I read in philosophy and basic kind of books and history, the better I felt about how I managed my time, I guess. So how that has changed over time, it's hard to say. I mean, the support that I've had from my friends and loved ones is like massive. Like I couldn't do anything without the support of my family and friends. So in terms of like work life, like that's key, and then in terms, you don't want to work like. There was definitely periods where I forced myself to be in the studio, and even when I had nothing to give, and it was hard. My studio was in Southeast Portland, and we lived in a different spot. So like when I was in the studio after work, I'd be in the studio, and like even if I was tired and I couldn't do it, I felt like I have to be here to like do the work that is important and meaningful to me. And that could be really hard when you just have a certain amount of time to do it, and you're kind of forced into that little space to make it happen. But I mean, that's when I would turn the music up loud and be like, okay, I just got to work, But I think over time I've kind of managed those expectations. Obviously, my life changed. My partner and I live in a different place. I can work from home now. But even the year in moving the studio to home, to where we live, I just feel like I started getting used to it like a few months ago. Like it was hard. It's very hard to just get in a good routine, So it's constantly a challenge. But yeah, I think you just gotta like not take yourself too seriously, because then things start to like look pretty bleak.
And it doesn't get easier.
No, it doesn't get easier. Exactly. I mean, yeah, it doesn't get easier. It's very easy, but it also doesn't get easier. So,
In terms of the books you mentioned, are there any that stand out to you still to this day as being like very impactful or significant?
Yeah, so David Graeber, Debt First 5,000 Years, massive. That was at a time where Obama was in the office, and there's a lot of like drone killings happening and wars and proxy war stuff happening. And I remember, just out of college trying to make sense of all that. And David Graeber just spoke through all of the crazy, sad reality that we were living through. And, post-recession, that thing lasted a long time. It was, to get out of school around that time where the economy was so bad, it was pretty bleak. And I was living in New York, and yeah. So that book was huge. Before then, it was mostly fiction that I was reading. And that book led me to all of the really important philosophy, like History of Western Philosophy by, what's his name? Forget his name, but that book was massive. Plato's Republic was huge. Like, I read that, and it was like, in terms of like a visual artist thinking, like there are chapters in that book, and they were written like 300 BC. This is literature that survived like so far through time. And I remember reading that book and being like, this is how my brain thinks about things, and it's there in this old ancient book. And it's amazing to think that like we're still like, you know, you want to think that you're like, we're in these like unprecedented times, which we are, but in terms of like who we are as people, like you kind of need that historical reference to feel grounded, you know. So just finding books that were old that I could, that, you know, after reading that, I wanted to read all, like, I wanted to, you know, if I could learn Greek, you know, ancient Greek, that would be so cool to be able to read books from back in the day in the original language. Of course, I don't have the time, and I don't even know the ability, but so those were kind of like important books. But there's a ton of books from that, you know, after that. And God, I'm trying to think of other ones. Gary Panter, Dal Tokyo is really important for when I worked on the comic stuff. Because I think my favorite artists on the internet are comic book artists or self-publishing comic book artists, and I got to know them, some artists, through the comic books world in Portland when I got out here. And yeah, the Dal Tokyo book was really cool in a way of considering how to write a piece of visual art but you're writing it, you know, which is kind of a weird thing to consider. I mean, Gary Panter's approach, I think, is pretty close to where I kind of, how I approach the problem. And then you have a lot of other, like, great visual art, comic book artists. Like, I don't really read a ton of comic books, but there's some really great comic book artists and books out there. I'm trying to think of anything else that is really key. Kafka's The Trial.
What?
Kafka's The Trial.
Coffees?
Kafka?
Oh, Kafka.
Yeah, Franz Kafka, The Trial.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
I never really got into his stuff, and then I read The Trial, and that was like, oh, this is the best. This is the best, like, modern piece of literature, because it was actually, it had a sense of humor, and it was so dark and so bleak, but also so funny. And that's what I want. Like, I think the coolest thing in the world is to be so absolutely dark and bleak, but at the same time, you can get your sense of humor through it too. And yeah, in terms of fiction, I think that one stands as like the top for me in terms of what you can really do with a piece of art, modern art. Yeah, modern condition, I guess. You know, because you hear that word modern, you know, modern art, like what the hell is that? But there is a condition to the modern life, you know, atomic age, I guess you would call it, or whatever. And I think that's to be able to encounter it and see it kind of represented that way can be really therapeutic.
Yeah, it's also nice to see like other artists and writers not take themselves seriously too. Like Kafka's The Metamorphosis. It's about a guy turning into a bug overnight.
Right.
Like, you know, his life falling apart.
Yeah.
Kind of pivoting in a little bit of a different direction. Do you have any like techniques for overcoming creative blocks, or like how do you usually deal with those as they come up, if at all?
Glass of wine. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, creative blocks are I think kind of natural as like feeling creatively, you know, on. I don't think if you have anything to say or to do in a moment, you shouldn't really, you know, that's when I think taking yourself too seriously can really, that for me, that's when I take myself too seriously, is like if I have a block or I don't know what I'm doing, I'm like maybe thinking that I'm not, like there's a certain amount of like, you know, I mean, spending so much time alone painting and then needing to share that work and not being able to share that work, for example. And like, you know, when this came through, I was like, oh, thank God, because I want to be able to share this stuff. So you can get kind of sad about things, you know. And I think with a certain amount of like disappointment, you know, you can get a creative block. You know, it's like, oh crap, you know, like, does anybody care? And then should they? Maybe not. I don't know. So yeah, I think once you kind of circle that kind of like beginning of despair and then come back around, you're like, oh, okay, you know, it's like, what are we doing? It's just, you know, this is that's why the whole, like, it should be easy, yeah, but it's also like very complicated because like, what is it exactly? What are we doing? So, yeah, I think in terms of like a hard answer to like that, it's just, yeah, taking time and making sure you're eating right and exercising and reading and putting your attention on other things, because you can, you know, especially if you're prone to obsess over things like I am, like you can, you know, do more damage than good. So, but you know, luckily those are, I think, more few than not as often as they could be. But yeah, I think Portland weather definitely can play a role in feeling blocked when it's just rainy all the time and the studio's damp and you're like, ugh, I gotta thaw out here, whatever. So.
I like how you talked about having multiple paintings, like all in the same space, and I feel like that would be helpful too, like
Yeah.
to jump from one to another when you're like, seems like a really enjoyable way to work too.
It is, yeah, definitely. Like, there's definitely so many different, like, every painting has its own kind of, like, asks for its own kind of thing to get done. And when you can pull out and then go on to another, and you find yourself doing all the physical motions that you weren't doing with the other painting, because it is physical, you know, it's a physical work. Like, that's what I like about painting too, is that like you get another canvas in front of you, and maybe it's discordant from the other ones. It's like, does this belong? Is this just a single paint? Like, I don't know if I like it. I don't want to make it necessarily look like the other paintings, but and then suddenly you start working on it, and you're moving in a way that you haven't in a while, and then it starts to reflect like, oh, you're like, oh yeah, now it's like a puzzle piece coming together, and it just takes time. And yeah, like having multiple pieces, and you have to move the pieces around. That's the other thing. You can't, like, I never want to move it around. I'm so lazy. Like, I'm like, just leave it there and work from it on the ground. And I actually kneel on the floor like I'm praying and painting, because I just like to have them grouped out in a way that I can go over here and then go over there. I also have an easel, but I kind of pull back from just putting things on an easel, because it's like, don't put it on a pedestal, right? Leave it on the ground and keep working. But eventually I think you do kind of want to, it's not always, but you want to have an easel, at least an option to put it on the easel. And yeah, but you have to move the pieces around, because it's just, you know, it's crazy. Like, even just walking out of the room, coming back into the room, moving one piece over here and the other piece over there, and then the other piece over here, you're seeing new combinations. It's like, yeah, you know, when you're collaging and stuff, you want to take pieces, you know, pages or images that you like, and sort them. And it's always good to move them around and see how they fit, where they don't fit, and where they help make things better. So as often as you can move them around, I think the better. And I think, yeah, you kind of have to do that. But when you need more space. There's never enough space in the studio, but I mean, I think that's part of it, is like moving things around. I got to like deal with how much space, like, I feel like I need more of. But you just got to manage it. You just got to, and like in the same way you have to sweep the floor, you know, and you got to clean the brushes. You have to move things around. You got to step back, and you can't like get too like you know, focused. Yes.
I think you are a genius. Really. I've been up here 4 times, and I just admire, I mean, the colors, everything looks like also that it's a 3D, 2D effect, and I don't know how you do that, but it's just great. And my partner, my friend that you saw, he had to leave out.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want me to tell you this, but he paints too. He
Mm.
paints a lot. And I mean, the whole apartment is just, every piece of wall is painting. But what was I going to say? Have you sold any of your stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's double cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The good thing that about when I started during COVID was that I had all the time to paint, and then everybody was on their phones and kind of online looking for connections. A lot of people were, and I was posting paintings as I was working, and as I collected a certain amount together between 2019 and 2021, I put together like a small portfolio PDF. But by that point, I had sold like some, and we would do First Fridays, and sometimes people would come and they would see paintings. And yeah, when I first sold like a big painting, I was like, oh my God, like that's crazy. I would never have thought in a million years that would happen. And it's really great. There's collectors out there in Portland and Astoria, and they've been amazing supporting my work. And yeah, there's friends as well. I'd say there's been individuals, probably like, I don't know how many, I think it's like maybe 20 or 30, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 30 people have bought work, and some people buy a lot. I wish I could sell more, but we just do what we can, I'm just grateful that anybody would want to support, and I appreciate it. But that is huge, yeah. I mean, somebody had there's a band called the Low Fives that had a waterfront studio. They actually just moved out of Portland, but they had this big building that they rented, and they would put on music shows. And I remember I had some paintings there, and sold a big painting from that show. And some people would just connect online and be like, I want one. It's like, okay, let's do it, So yeah, it was a great, I mean, being self-taught and using all of the media.
You're self-taught. I can't believe it. This guy has gone to school. You can't, I mean, all this is 3D and it's oil. And I know when Stephen plays with oil sometimes, if it smudges or it's wrong, I mean, he really gets upset because he can't, he still loves to play with it, but.
It was a breakthrough for me seeing a painter who was messy but made brilliant paintings with all the perspective and color that you would want in a painting. And it was neo-rock. I was talking about it earlier. I don't know if you were here for it, but you get to a certain distance and it just snaps into focus, and it's just brilliant. But if you get really close to it, it's a mess. It's like doesn't make any sense, and you can see parts of the brush are left on the thing, and it just looks like somebody left a mess on the thing. But if you get to a certain spot, you're like, oh yeah, there it is. And that's what I think is really key, because before then too, I felt the same way. Whenever I started doing anything with paint, I go crazy with how meticulous I felt like I had to get with it. Where does the line end or begin, and how do I make it look clean and not messy? And then as soon as I could see a painting that I thought was brilliant, that shows all the brushwork and is a mess at certain points, I was like, oh yeah, there's nothing you don't have to think about it that hard. It's really, the paint it'll figure it out. The brushes, I like to use shitty brushes because it's the paint. It's just moving the paint. It's not the brush. It's not anything. It's just the paint is really amazing stuff. Like, it's a really great medium. You know, I think yeah.
This one here, when you talk, every time I look at this,
Yeah.
the way you, this color here, I mean, it's
Yeah.
and this, of course, but the way the brush, you know, it just, it's magnificent.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I will talk.
It's okay. Yeah. No, it's amazing how even just color, like just putting a color in a spot somewhere can just change perspective, and yeah, it's amazing. It's not all me though. It's, you know, it's a lot of different things, you know, and everybody can do it. It's just, you know, there has to be, you know, there's got to be, everybody needs their own kind of way into doing whatever they're going to do, whether it's oil painting or writing or collaging or music. Yeah, you can be cognizantly aware of what you want, but then you also have to be in a place, and you do things to find how you get into the practice of it and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you kind of have to get creative to do that, you know, and make an effort and not be lazy. I'm so lazy, like, in my heart, but you gotta just go. So you gotta drink a lot of coffee, and, you know, just make sure you know, get out there into the world and go to the galleries. You see stuff on Instagram. Oh, I saw it on Instagram. No, you gotta go to the show or whatever it might be and just see it, you know.
We're coming up on the 4:30 mark, so if anyone has any remaining questions, one of the ones I'd like to ask is, I know you mentioned that you know, went to school for finance and then you ended up taking a creative writing class, and that kind of pivoted you, like, completely. But do you think your time spent in school before that, like, how does that influence your practice today?
The time that I spent, you know, in elementary school through high school, or?
I mean, like, when you were on the finance track.
Oh, on the finance track. When I was in school, I wanted to get out of school the whole time. I did not really enjoy it. It's weird. I did it because I thought I had to do it. What was I going to say? With finance. My family life from a very early age kind of exploded, and I ended up living with strangers at 16, and it was a total, just like, my life was one thing and then it got completely flipped upside down. And I think it was, while, like, going to college was like a thing that I felt like I had to do. There was a lot of people that were like trying to help me out and take care of me through periods where I was basically kind of on my own. And I was just kind of not really, I wanted to, with friends and family, and just trying to figure things out the whole time. And I didn't know what was going on. And I was just like, I don't know, my life was flipped upside down. And, you know, I went to study finance because certain effort had been made to get me into college that was kind of out of my hands. And the people who were supporting me, the people who had adopted me as a teenager, were like, you know, we're not gonna you're not going to school to, like, study or to do, you're going there to, like, get a job or whatever, you know, because once you get out, you gotta have to, you know, you're gonna face the world, and it's gonna be this horrible, ugly place, and da da da. And so I was like, okay, finance, I can do math, whatever, you know, money. And you know, and I love New York, and I'm like, okay, you know, I'll figure it out in New York. Yeah, it was pretty early on in school when I was like, I just wasn't happy. I wasn't learning anything. I didn't like the class. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't start liking school until I started the creative writing course. And then when I started doing creative, like when I knew that I wanted to do creative stuff, like there weren't enough classes. Like I was already far enough along in my studies, so then I had to finish with a finance degree or finish with with just a regular bachelor's. And I wanted to be able to, like, well, I already put all this effort into finance. I'll get the finance degree, which I have, but I'm not using it. I don't ever intend to use it. And the whole time when I did decide that, like, I wanted to figure out, like, my life as a creative person, I just wanted to get out of school. I just was waiting to get out of school. And my friends during that time, it's just kind of like an aimless period for me. And as soon as I left and I went to New York, that's when I started living my life. And that's when I felt like I started to really explore, like, different things and to, really figure out where I was going in life. And unfortunately, it's all outside of the institutional realm. It wasn't in it. And also, yeah, like, I wanted to focus my efforts towards like literature and English, but in the formal study, like, I would have liked to be in the university studying a creative or history, anthropology or something like that. But I missed my window. Like, when I got into school, I went for the wrong reason. And then by the time I realized, I was like, oh, I got to leave. So I kind of, would have been nice to go to school for something that I wanted to go to school for. But it is what it is, and I had to do it all outside. So.
One of the last questions I have is, considering this is your debut solo exhibition, looking forward, like, how would you like to develop your career as an artist?
Oh, wow. That is another $1 million question. How do I want to go from here? I would love to be able to consistently show work. I don't know how to do that yet. There has to be a relationship with a gallery or somebody. I don't have that. So until that point, I'm just like building the dreamscapes that, would fill a space. So I think the first desire is to just collaborate with other people who like to show art or to share art, and I kind of do that. Like, I'm meeting other artists in Portland whose work I really like, and I'm going to shows that I want to see, and Nick Norman, Ty Ennis, other artists in Portland, meeting them and just kind of getting out there. I think at times I feel like maybe Portland is a little small, like compared to New York, obviously. I wonder, are there other things in nearby cities, whether it's Seattle or somewhere like that? I don't know, but I would love to be able to branch out in ways. I just don't know exactly how that goes, but I know that the work that I put into the studio over the last 4 years, like selling work, so I just had to keep making work, and then people reach out to me that are impressed by it and they want to see more of it. So I know that all I can do until then is just work in the studio, I would love to get involved with like education somehow. Like, I know that there's opportunity, there's the city of Portland, they do painting programs and stuff like that. I would love to do something somehow like that, because I think it would be really cool to interact with other artists, even beginning artists and stuff like that. So, I love talking about this stuff, as you can see. So, the more that I can connect with people about, my experience and learn from them, that's what I want too. Because you hear that, like, painters who are also teachers, for example, there's so much to learn from your students, and I'd love to to the opportunity to just connect with more people. So.
What kind of oil painting mediums do you use?
The oil painting, that's a great question. When I stretch the canvas, I do a PVA. It's like Elmer's glue mixed with distilled water. I put that on the linen or the canvas. Then I gesso it a couple times, sand it down. So after that point, most of these paintings, if not all of them, are underpainted with just sienna, burnt sienna, or raw sienna, and mineral spirit, and that's all I use: oil and mineral spirit, which is Gamsol or that's it. When I first started, I was like, okay, there's all these other things like these gels and other stuff, which are really cool, and I think those are great to use those too. But to make it simple, it's essentially just mineral spirit and oil itself, because oil has all the one of the things you have to learn is that like oil paint is made with linseed oil and then the pigments and stuff like that. So if you want to add more linseed oil, you can do that, but it's going to start to get a sheen on it, and I never wanted to have the sheen in the same way that like I don't really like to have art behind glass, because there's a reflection and you see the reflection, you don't see the art. I've always been attracted to matte because I feel like that's where you get to see the perspective and the colors really sing. Once you start adding more to it, I think you take away from what is natural about the paint itself. When I first started painting, on a couple paintings actually, I used I did kind of layers, and if you layer too much with just mineral spirit, you can get a washed out look from it, and then that's when you put a varnish on it, and that brings the color back out. So
doesn't that make it shiny?
It does a little bit, but you can get varnish that won't make it shiny. But I don't use varnish now. I did on a couple paintings when I first started, because the washed out look was coming through. Some of my favorite paintings that I sold, even, I had to varnish them before I sold them, because there was certain detail and layering that you kind of can see where things are drier than other parts, and it kind of looks a little washed out. But once you varnish, it's like, whoa. But the solution to not having to varnish is just more oil paint. So I think the impasto is okay. When you are working on it'll live longer. It's just a surefire bet. Like, I think the more you need to add, the more you're going to have to care for it over time. And varnish yellows over time, and you don't necessarily want that. If you have somebody who can take care of that stuff, or you know how to like restore paintings, that's cool. But I think ultimately you would want the painting to just have everything it needs, and that is just oil paint, basically. Oil paint is beautiful. It's great. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about, but it's 4:30 now, so I think this is a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much, Spencer, for coming out and talking to us about all of this.
Thank you, everybody. Seriously, I couldn't be happier to be here. I'm love it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.